Okay, so we're back. What we want to look at doing is really look at the bridge of how we're going to, we've been working for 5 or 6 weeks building some simple ASP.NET applications. They've pretty much been divorced from a database back end. We played around a couple weeks ago before the exam with SQL Server, what it looked like to set up the database, what the interface, the Management Studio interface that was kind of like Workbench, how that all looked. But what I want to talk a bit about is how we connect the two. So traditionally, ASP.NET had this library called ADO.NET that was similar to the PDO library we used in our PHP applications. So we used PHP for our web front end, we used MySQL for our database back end, and we used the PDO library that would do things like connect, fetch queries, execute SQL commands. So ADO is an older library that's similar to PDO. It does things like connect, disconnect, execute SQL commands, store query results, etc. So traditionally, up until probably about 4 or 5 years ago, we would write very similar data access code in an ASP.NET application from what we did in PHP. And about 4 or 5 years ago, Microsoft introduced an entirely new layer that sits in between. So we no longer write these kinds of commands like query, execute, connect, disconnect. Those commands are still there, but we don't really see them. They kind of now live under the hood. And what sits in its place instead is this technology called the Entity Framework. Entity Framework is what's known as an ORM tool. Has anybody ever heard of the acronym ORM in programming? Have any idea what it means?
Object Relay Model?
You're close. But actually, the hint's right here. So ORM is an object relational mapper. Okay. So what that means is the entity framework, if we think about how our data is structured in our database, we have a series of related tables. And in our web applications, what we will have are objects, right? We've been talking about objects for several weeks now. So we can have objects on our pages like text boxes and buttons, but we can also have objects that represent parts of our application. So if we have a content management, we might have objects like pages, categories, blog posts. If we're building a shopping cart, we might have objects in our applications like customers, products, and orders. So what ORM tools like Entity Framework do is they do the work of connecting up, let's say, a customer object in our application to the customer table in our database. And what they do is they will automatically write most of the code for us, which is great. So all of this underlying stuff like connecting and querying, a lot of this is handled by Entity Framework. Okay? It's a very different way of thinking about things. Many of the tasks that we've done in a PHP application that we've done manually, are going to get automated for us, which is great. It's really powerful. It saves us a lot of time, but it also takes a little while to get used to doing things in this way. Okay? So Entity Framework is Microsoft's ORM tool, ORM mapper. There are lots of them, and many other different technologies, not just ASP.NET, use object relational mappers. So just to give you a quick introduction as to what this looks like, and there's a couple ways. Just going to show you a quick video. Guy does pretty good talk on what Entity Framework is and how we use it to get our ASP.NET pages to pull data from SQL Server, and how we also can save data to SQL Server using Entity Framework. This is maybe only, I think it's under 10 minutes. So I'm just going to freeze the, okay. So he does have a whole series of other videos on here, which are pretty good. So the link to here is on Blackboard. It's this Intro to EF was the link to the video we just watched, but you can see his other ones. So he mentioned that there's a few different approaches. So if we're starting with a brand new application, we don't have a database, we can actually design the objects. Okay, we need a student object, and we need an instructor object, and we need a course object. We can actually build those in Visual Studio. In Visual Studio, the Entity Framework will actually build the tables in our SQL Server database for us. That's one option. We're going to do the reverse. Typically, I find we usually have a database already in many cases. So we're going to start, I'm going to give you a database. We'll set it up in SQL Server, but we'll use the Entity Framework database first approach to automatically generate all of the business classes that we need in our Visual Studio application. Then we can just focus on writing the user interface, and Entity Framework connects the database to our application. There is another Entity Framework tutorial here. So this is a link from Microsoft. So I've put the link up here. So there's a pretty good video here where there's a walkthrough with screenshots. So this would be fairly similar to what we do in class, but this is here as another resource, something else you can go through on your own time. So that's here. The other thing that I'm going to mention we'll use a little bit, we won't get into too heavily, but one of the neat things when well, some of you will think it's neat and some of you won't. When we use the Entity Framework, it basically removes the need for us to write SQL commands. We no longer have to write SQL for performing database operations like create, read, update, and delete. Microsoft has come up with their own query syntax, their own language that they call LINQ. Stands for Language Independent Network Query. So the idea, this would be, for example, a sample query if we wanted to get customers with a where clause of city in Boston and we wanted to get the name and the address, and we would store the result. So it's fairly English-like, it's fairly simple, it's a little bit more lightweight and faster than SQL. And one of the nice things about it, they called it language independent because they can use this not only to query a related database, we could use it to query a flat file or any other kind of data source. We'd use this same query language. So we'll use this syntax a little bit. We really only need it when we're selecting data. When we're doing insert, update, and delete with Entity Framework, we don't even need to use this at all. The code is even simpler. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a simple SQL Server database. It's a sample database from Microsoft. There's basically, I think there's 4 tables in it. It's for a mini sort of university application. So it has a students table, a departments table, a courses table, and an enrollments table, I believe. So I've given you this script. So what we want to do is get connected to SQL Server, and then we're going to want to create a new database and create and populate these 4 tables. So we'll start that first, and then we'll look at how do we use Entity Framework to build a new .NET application and start connecting, talking to our SQL Server database. So if you're on the lab machine, you'll want to open up Management Studio this way. Okay, so here are the instructions. So programs, computer studies, Microsoft SQL Server 2008 R2, and then open up SQL Server Management Studio. Okay. I'm going to recommend, moving forward, it will be much, much easier if you all have Management Studio installed and configured on your laptop, because if you don't, you have to come in every week, and you're going to have to recreate the database, which is a bit, so the steps we're going to do now, you're going to have to do every week. Because what we're going to do is build out this application over the next 4 or 5 classes. We're going to work with the same database each week and continually add on new features so our .NET site gets bigger and bigger. So your life would be much easier if you have this running on your own machine and you don't have to set it up each week all over again.
How do you install it though? I downloaded it, but I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, there should be a setup file. So if you're on the lab machine for today, open Management Studio, and to connect the same way we did a few weeks ago, the server is localhost and then a /ACPAC, and you can just choose Windows authentication on the lab machine. If you're on your own computer, to get into Management Studio, you open up SQL Server Management Studio, and when it prompts you to connect, the server name is just local. The authentication is SQL Server authentication. Your login is always SA. And your password is whatever password you created when you installed SQL Server. I told you a few weeks ago when you installed it, make note of your password, your admin password, because you need it every time to connect. And on your own machine, if you click remember, you shouldn't get prompted for it every time. It should remember it.
But if it gets when I'm just downloading it now, I make a password just then.
Yeah, when you do the install, you can accept all the defaults, but it will ask you to supply an administrator password for the SA account. So you need to make a note of that in a text file somewhere.
Yeah.
So we should get in either on the lab computer or on your own computer. Once you've signed in, this is basically what you'll get. You should see the Object Explorer in the left and the server name. On the lab machine, it will say localhost /ACK or localhost /ACPAC. On your own machine, it will say local. So if we expand databases, again, on your own machine, if you're on a lab machine for today, you're going to have to do this again next week, so better off to get it on your own machine so you don't have to keep setting up. So we're going to create a new database. So I've expanded databases. Just right-click databases, choose new database. And I'll call my database COMP2084. I'll just use one database for the class. Obviously, one of the other nice things about this, unlike when we were using DreamHost with PHP when you only got one database, here you can create as many databases as you want. So if you want to have an in-class database and then for your assignment you want to create as a separate database, you can do that. So I'll just click OK, and it will create a blank database called COMP2084. So I've got it down at the bottom here. When I click tables, there's nothing here. It's just a blank database. So the script to create and populate the tables we're going to work with is right here on Blackboard. It's this Contoso DB SQL script. It's just a text file with a .SQL extension. So if you want to just right-click that and choose Save Link As, you can just save this to the default location. Doesn't matter where you save it. I'll just save it into a COMP2084 folder. So the file's called Contoso scripts 1.sql. So just download that file to your machine. Once you've downloaded the file, if you just click on your database, your COMP2084 database, and up here at the top, click New Query. And this will open up the query editor. It'll say COMP2084 in this little drop down here, so we know we're in the right database. And now if you just click on File and Open File, and browse to that SQL file that you just downloaded. So here's the Contoso scripts file I just downloaded. So this is going to create a student's enrollments, departments, and courses table, and it will insert a few records into each one. So all we need to do to run this is just click the execute button, and it will run this whole script. You don't need to put it or do a use command. Just click execute. Should tell you it executed successfully. And now if I go over here to my tables and click refresh, you should get 4 tables here. I now have courses, departments, enrollments, students. So we're going to work with this each week. So if you're going to continue working on the lab machines, we'll need to repeat this process each week when you come in. Open up Management Studio, log in, grab that script, create the database, and run the script to build out the database. So now we can build our .NET application that'll work with it.
There's a little behind. Can you go over adding the file to the database?
Okay. So click on your database and click New Query. That'll open up a query panel on the right. And then just click from the File Open menu.
Okay.
Choose File. Click on your SQL file. That will open it up. And then you can just click the Execute button on the toolbar. It will run that SQL script.
Okay.
So if you're on your own machine, you only had to do this today. You don't have to do this moving forward. You now have the COMP2084 database. So if we want to look at what's in here, I'll show you quickly. So here's the departments table. So 4 departments. There's a courses table. So there's a relationship between the courses and departments, right? Each course belongs to a department. There's a students table. And there is an enrollments table that has 2 relationships. So every enrollment is a combination of one student in one particular course, and they may or may not have a grade, depending on whether they've completed the course. So this database is almost a mini version of Blackboard or Banner. Really, I guess it's almost a mini version of Banner. And we're going to build this out based on this database, sort of our own little small ASP.NET version of Banner, where we've got departments, courses, students, and grades. Okay, to give you an idea of, now my Wednesday and Monday classes, they're a few weeks ahead of us, so I'll show you where we are with those. We're kind of building this same application, so if you want to see where we're going, you can also look at those videos on YouTube, because they're a few weeks ahead of us. But I'll give you an idea of what we're going to sort of be building. Okay, so everybody be okay getting the database set up? Once you have the Dave, problem?
I can't connect to mine. It says the network is not found.
You mean right at the splash screen as soon as you open it up?
Yeah.
And did you put in local as the server
Yeah.
in brackets?
Yeah, it just says the network connection is not found.
Okay, if that's the case, SQL Server might not be running. You may have to actually start the server.
Okay.
Let me think for a minute. There's a few places we can look to do this. Do you see under your SQL Server menu, do you have a configuration tool submenu?
Yeah.
Okay, if you can open that in there, there should be SQL Server Configuration Manager.
Okay.
Open that. I'll open mine as well so you can see it.
Okay.
Under SQL Server Services, hang on, this may not be where we want to be. Actually, let's look here. Go into your control panel. And then into administrative tools and services. And you should get a window that looks similar to this.
Yeah.
So scroll down. and click on SQL Server. You see it there in the list?
Yeah.
Okay, what does it say for status?
Running.
It says running?
Yeah.
And does it say startup type automatic?
Yeah.
Okay, and what about the SQL Server agent? Is that also running or started?
No.
Okay. Right click on that and choose properties.
Okay.
If you have an option to start it or change the startup type to automatic, do that. I don't know if you have options to change anything.
Yeah, I can right click it and click start.
Okay, so click start, and then you may have to go back to close Management Studio and reopen it, and I think you should be able to connect. If not, let me know and I'll come have a look. So if you can open up Visual Studio, what we're going to do, we're going to take our application that we built back in week 5. I'm going to open that up and I'm going to use it as a template. So if you don't have your files from class 5, because it already had a master page, it had some CSS links, you can grab the file off of Blackboard. So if you go to lesson 5, and go to my lesson 5 files, which is a link to GitHub. You can download this as a zip file. If you have your own files from week 5, that's fine. Just open those up. You don't have to use mine. We're going to get rid of a lot of what was in here. We're just going to kind of keep the master page and the application set up. So I'll open up my solution from lesson 5. I'll run it for a second just so we can see what was in there. But I don't want to have to rebuild the master page and add the CSS links because we already kind of had that stuff running. So we can use lesson 5 as a template. So here was the application we built a few weeks ago. So we had this header and footer. We had our links to using Bootstrap. So we'll keep that stuff, but then we'll replace these pages with stuff for today. So just download, extract that folder. Be right with you, Dave. And open it up in Visual Studio. Okay, so I'm just going to click on File. I'll export this as a template. You can put in a description if you want to. So it creates it. So now I'm going to close my lesson 5. And I'm going to click File and New Project. But now, rather than creating a blank application, normally we choose Visual C# and we choose Web here. This time, instead of picking Web, I'm just going to click on Visual C#, the main menu at the top here. Okay. And if I scroll down to the bottom, now as a list in my list of templates, we have our lesson 5, COMP2084 lesson 5. So I'm going to call this COMP2084 lesson 8. So now when I create the project, it will basically make a copy of lesson 5. So the things we want to keep, we don't have to add them in manually. They're already here.
Sorry, how did you create the template?
in lesson 5, with the lesson 5 open, to make any project a template, you just click on File and Export Template.
Okay.
And then you can accept all the defaults in the wizard. And then when you make a new one, when you pick Visual C#, that will show up in your list of templates. So now I have an exact duplicate. If I run my file, I now have an exact duplicate of our file from 3 weeks ago. So now we can start making some changes here. I want to replace these links. So we really only have a default page. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into our master page. So we have this nav bar. It says COMP2084. That takes us back to our home page. And then we had links to default page 2 and page 3. I'm going to change the nav bar. So the first thing I'm going to do is where it said COMP2084. I'm going to change the title, so that'll be this main link here that's in larger letters, to Contoso University. So that's what our application is. It's like I said, a mini version of Banner. Contoso is the name of the database that Microsoft created. Then I'm going to change these links. We'll leave this one, actually, sorry, we don't need this one because we already have a link to home. So we're going to add, our first link is going to go to departments.aspx. Our second link will go to courses. And our third link will go to students. So all of these pages will be tied to our SQL Server database. They'll show the department's information, course information, or student information. So now if I just refresh, I just changed the HTML. You know, no C#, no need to recompile. All I did was change some of the static text. Okay. So we don't have these pages, so if I click any of these links, I'm going to get a 404. We'll build these pages out over the next few weeks. So when I click departments, I'm going to get that. I'm also going to get rid of the text that's on here. This is our home page. I'm going to get rid of this, and I'll just put in a little bit of, I'll just put in a sentence or two for some generic homepage filler text. So I'm going to open up my default page. We had this form here last week or 3 weeks ago. So everything in this ASP content block, I'm going to take all of it out. Strip my page back down to nothing. And I'll just put on a title, COMP2084, maybe in class application. So that could be the title for the home page. And I'll just put in a small paragraph. I'll use a Bootstrap class to style it. You don't have to copy this text. I'm just putting in a description of what this application is. So there's no code on here at all, just an HTML page. So this will be the home page of our little mini application. So each week from now on, we're just going to keep building onto this. We'll start with the departments. Over the next week, 2 weeks, we'll do create. Between this week and next week, we'll try and do create, read, update, and delete with our departments table. Then we'll look at the students table, the courses table, and then we'll add some security to it in a few weeks. So now if I go to my home link, I just get this. That giving that bootstrap class of well gives it that gray border, gives it the gray background with the rounded edges. So if I go to my web.config, it's pretty blank, pretty empty. The only thing here we added a few weeks ago was this is so that when we use our validators, our jQuery will work. So we'll keep that section here because we will be building in input forms. We'll want to use validation. So the first page we want to build is this one. We've got a departments page, and what we want to show is a grid that shows the list of departments. If I go and look at my database, here's the departments table. We want a page that when the user clicks departments, we'll see this data in a grid. We know how to do that with PHP. We'll now look at how we're going to do this in ASP.NET, talking to our SQL server. So we're going to create a new page. We'll go over to our Solution Explorer on the right. I'll select my project. I'll right-click it, and I'll choose Add, New Item. And I want a web form with a master page. We want to use our existing master page so our page gets our CSS, our header and footer. So I'm going to call this page, and use all lowercase, please. All our page names will be lowercase. Call it departments with an S, plural. And click Add. And then Visual Studio will prompt us to choose the master page to provide the template. We only have one master page, so I'll just click on the site.master. So we get a blank page. I'll just give it a title of departments. Whoops. We had a little bit of code on our default page from week 5. We had a submit button click. I'm now getting an error because I got rid of this label, so I'm just going to take this out. So if you click on build, you're going to get this error. Label message does not exist. If we just double click that error, it'll take us into this file. We can just get rid of these lines of code here. This whole function, this method for when our submit button was clicked, we don't have a submit button on this page anymore. You can just get rid of those 4 lines in blue. Just delete them. We don't need them. Okay. So those are gone. I'll try to rebuild now. Now I get no errors. So now if I refresh my departments page, I should get a blank page. Okay, so it's got using our master still. It's got a header and footer, just doesn't have anything else here yet. So let's add a few things to our departments page so we can show the list of departments. First thing I'm just going to add is a simple heading. I'll add an H1 tag. So our page has a visible title. Yeah, the H1's pretty big. That's okay. So now we want to build a table. We basically want to represent this data. This grid right here, we want a C# representation on our web page. If we were doing this with PHP, what things would we need to do in order to display this kind of information right here underneath our title but above our footer? How would we show that set of data in here? What things would we need to do?
Query the database.
Yeah, so we'd have to, well, first, what we'd have to do even before we could query the database? We'd have to connect to the database, write a query, yeah, start a table, loop through the results, and write out for each row in our query, write out one column at a time and disconnect. The process in ASP.NET's a little simpler because Microsoft was smart enough back in 2002 to give us a grid control. I'm actually just going to type one on. You can drag and drop. I'm going to type on an ASP grid view tag. This is a server control, so we'll have to specify the run at equals server attribute. And we have to give it an ID. I'll give it a little 3-character prefix of GRD for grid. We'll call it grid departments. I'm also going to give it a class. Bootstrap has a bunch of classes for styling tables. So I'll set the CSS class attribute to one of these long, funky Bootstrap names. It'll be table, table striped, and I'm also going to give it the table hover class. So as I roll over the grid, each row gets highlighted as the mouse moves over it. We don't need to specify anything else. We will, but we'll start off this way. We'll just use a base grid view. This is all the HTML we have to put on this page for now to populate the grid. So we've got our database. We have our list of departments. We have our C# application. What we need to do now is this piece. We need to use Entity Framework so that our application can run the query against SQL Server and pull and render the data out. So this is going to go through this process. I may have to go through it a couple of times. So here's how we're going to get our application to talk to our database. I'm going to right-click on my project and choose Add New Item. This time, so far when we've been adding things, we've always been working inside of the web panel, adding style sheets, master pages, web forms. This time I'm going to pick on the data section under Visual C#. And the first option you should have here is called ADO.NET Entity Data Model. So I'm going to pick on that first option, ADO.NET Entity Data Model. And down at the bottom, I'm going to call it Contoso, because that's the name of our data set. Contoso is the name of this fictional university that we're working with. Now, there's quite a few steps in this wizard. So I'm going to click Add. So now, if you remember from the video, he talked about the different ways we can use Entity Framework. We can choose model first, we can choose code first. We're going to choose this one, the EF designer, so we're going to do database first. We already have an existing database with tables. We want Entity Framework to generate objects in our Visual Studio application that match our tables. So I'm just going to keep this first option selected. You may only have 2 options. That's fine. You just pick the one that says from database. Okay, so we're doing the database first model. Click Next. And now it says, okay, what database do you want to connect to? So you click on New Connection. Your server name, if you're on the lab machine, your server name is localhost / not a / /ACPAC. And you just leave Windows authentication. And where it says select or enter the database name, you just type in COMP2084. If you're on your own machine, the server is local in brackets. We'll get to your question in 1 second. And you enter your SQL Server credentials. So for most of you, the server name will be local. Yours will be David. So you enter your SQL Server password, click Save, and then you can select or type the name of the database.
Before I get to that, something else popped up.
Ah, sorry, you guys get this. I've already done this. Before you get this, it says, what type of data source do you want? So you'll get this window first, I think. Choose Microsoft SQL Server, and you can check always use this selection. That way you won't get prompted for this screen first anymore. So choose SQL Server.
What's the difference between that and MySQL database?
Well, MySQL is a MySQL database, like that runs on an Apache server, the kind we used in Intro to Web Programming.
No, the server.
Between this?
Yeah.
This is if you have, this would be only for working with a local file. So this allows you to connect not only to a file on your own machine, but it would allow you to connect to a remote SQL server like on a host. So you can just choose Microsoft SQL Server and click OK. So enter your credentials, whatever credentials you used in Management Studio, you're adding them here. Okay, you can click the test connection to make sure you're able to connect, and now Visual Studio is able to access your database directly. So click OK. Once you click OK, it'll take you to this screen. Now we've got two choices. So what this will do is this is what our database connection string looks like. You remember in PHP how we typed out that PDO connection string every time? This is an entity framework connection string. It has to get added to our web.config file. The wizard will do it for you. So you don't have to type this. You don't have to learn this. So I'll say, yes, just include my password in the connection string. And then it says, okay, what do you want to save this as? We have to give it a name. By default, it will say COMP2084, which is the name of your database, entities. We're going to change this. We're going to change the name, and we're going to call it default connection in camel case. For today, we don't really have to change it, but when we add this ASP.NET security package, it automatically looks for a connection string called default connection. So it's easier if we just get in the practice from today of calling our connection string default connection. And then just click next. This will add this connection string that has the host, the database name, your username, password. It'll put this in your web.config file for us. So we'll click on next. You may or may not get this prompt, which version of Entity Framework. They're up to version 6 now. We'll just use version 6. May as well use the latest version. There's not much difference between 6 and 5. So I'll click next here.
What did you want us to name the connection again?
Default connection. And capitalize the D on default and capitalize the C on connection and no space in between them. So now it says, okay, what do you want to include in your model? So if I expand tables, we can actually see all the tables in our database. I'm going to click on all of them. We want to add all 4 of the tables. So our database may have additional tables we don't need. Well, we just don't have to select them, and then they won't be part of our application. And it'll give this a model namespace of COMP2084 model. Oh crap, I didn't put this where I wanted to put it, which is fine because I can go, that means I'll walk through the process one more time. Sorry, click cancel. We'll go through it one more time. What I meant, I wanted to do this. Notice Visual Studio gave us this models folder. Our data model should go in here. That's what it's there for. So I'm going to go through the whole process again. You're welcome. So select the models folder, and now we're going to do the exact same thing. Right-click models and choose add, new item. We'll choose data and ADO.NET entity data model, which I will call Contoso. The nice thing is we won't have to do this next week because we can export this solution as a template, and now our template will already include this stuff. So we'll choose from database again. The connection's already here now, so I'll just say include my connection, and I'll call it default connection. Again, a capital D, a capital C with no space. And I'll click next. We'll leave it as Entity Framework 6. And I'll just check tables, which will automatically select all 4 tables. And I'll click Finish. This will chug away for a minute because Visual Studio's got to do a whole lot of stuff. It's going to add the connection string to web.config, and it's going to take each one of our tables, students, departments, courses, and enrollments, and it's going to build an object with all of the properties of that table. It's also going to build a class that will handle all of our connecting and disconnecting for us. So it will prompt me, I have my web.config open. You may not get this message. If you do, just say yes to all. Saying, we've changed the file, do you want to reload it and open the current version? So I'll say yes. So here is our model. This is what Visual Studio generated for us. It generated a department model with these properties and a relationship to the courses, because every course belongs to a department. It generated a model based on each one of our tables. And these models basically have built-in create, read, update, and delete functionality. We don't have to write it, we can just call those methods. We're going to make one change in here, and notice it gives this an EDMX extension. Now in the video he said, if you're comfortable, if you don't have a database, we can actually start here. So if we had no database, we could build this file and plan out our objects here, and then we could generate the database from here, which is what some people prefer. That's the model first approach. Design your model visually, and then use Visual Studio to build the database automatically. I like the database first model. Notice there's one funky thing here with this model. What do you notice about it? Yeah, it took off the E because our table name was plural, our model names are singular. I want to put the E back in. It's going to bug me if we have to call it course without an E. So I'm just going to click on the word course. It highlights it. If I click on the end, I can put my E back in. Same over here. My enrollment has a navigation property. This means a relationship. It also did it here, so I want to click here where it says course without the E and put in my E. Making those changes, I get a little star here, meaning my changes are unsaved. I'm just going to click on save to save those changes. Now Visual Studio did a lot more than just build this diagram. If I go back to my Solution Explorer and I look in models, here's my EDMX file if I close this and I want to see it at any point. So this is nice because it built out basically a database diagram that we can see right in Visual Studio. So if I want to add something in my departments table, I can open up the diagram and say, oh, okay, here's my department table. It's got a department ID. So maybe I want to see, well, how big is the name? because I want to set the max length on a name box on my form. If I just choose properties, here it shows me name, here you go, max length 50. So I could go into my database and look if I need to. So here's my column with name, but I can actually now see my database right through Visual Studio, through the model, which some people like. So not only did it build the model, but if I expand all this, down here, I get a Contoso context, sorry, a Contoso TT, and notice it built out all of these C# files. So it gave me, here's my department object. Remember we talked about objects back several weeks ago, that objects had properties and methods? Well, here's what a department looks like in this application. A department has a list of courses related, and it has 3 properties: an integer department ID, a string name, and a budget that's a decimal that can be null. If we want to look at what does a student look like, Entity Framework built out a student object for us. So all these objects have built-in create, read, update, delete methods, and we used Entity Framework and the wizard to auto-build all of these business objects. So our other option that he talked about in the video with Entity Framework is code first. If you like this, if you like to define your stuff in code, because that's what you're comfortable with, you could actually start here. You could build these yourself and then say, okay, create my database from my code objects. So we basically have 3 options. You can start with the database like we did. You could start here and build the database from here. Or you can start with the diagram and let the diagram build the database and the classes. You can go in any direction, any starting point you're comfortable with. You'll get the same result through all of it. Okay. So I like the database first approach because most of the time we have an existing database that we're starting from. So it makes sense to start and use the database first approach in that case. If it's a brand new application where you have no database, well, you have a choice. You start where you're comfortable. You can start here, you can start here, or you can start here. Entity Framework will let you go in any direction. Any questions so far? This is really, really powerful. Okay? It'll take a little while to get used to. It took me a while to get used to. But once we do, we realize how much faster it makes things for us. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a break. We'll come back at 10:15, and we're going to use the Entity Framework to populate this page. We'll get our grid populated, and then we'll customize it, and then we'll start building a page so that we could add a new department. And we may not finish that today. That's fine. If we don't, we'll resume that next week. Okay, so we'll take a 10-minute pause here.